today we're talking to Matteo Salvai. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfectly.
Okay. And Matteo, you've just been promoted, so congratulations. Could you tell us what your new position is and what it entails?
Yeah, for sure. I'm now the head of the press and social media team for one department of the Commission, the one that is dealing with communicating the EU funding, basically.
Okay.
And before I was working a bit on fighting disinformation, so in the communication department in the Commission.
Right.
And before that, I was working outside of the Commission, different role, always in communication. I'm a kind of journalist as a background, but
Okay.
I didn't make it to be a real journalist.
Well, this is important work you're doing too. So, we've done a lot of research talking to average citizens, let's say normal, everyday citizens on the street. And the general consensus we get, this is anecdotal, but widespread, is that most citizens are not aware about the EU, why it exists, what it does for them, why it should exist. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for this, and of course, probably also the result will change a lot from country to country within the EU.
Yeah.
So I mean, one thing is probably linked to the education and to school, because there is no EU affair as a subject in a lot of school, especially like high school and something like this. So, for instance, even talking about myself, before joining the EU, I haven't studied EU affairs.
Right.
Very, very little.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's for sure the thing. The other thing is, of course, a lot of news that are coming from the European Union are mediated at the national level. So I think citizens are more informed through national lenses.
Yeah.
And for this there are a number of reasons. One, of course, is language.
Yeah.
So, there are 24 languages in the European Union. So communicating in all of those is super difficult. The European Union now is basically communicating in English only, but English, and not that many of European citizens speak English, so you need to anyway to address them in other languages. And also, and so I think our big effort would be to try to decentralize a bit more the communication, so to maybe communicate Europe more at the national level. So there are offices, for instance, of the European Commission, European Parliament, the national level. They do the job.
I lost you.
Or maybe they could be strengthened or reinforced.
You're back.
Okay. Now? Okay.
Yes. Right, because you were talking about fundings. Now, what was interesting to me was, regarding Poland and Hungary and their slide into autocracy and authoritarian type governments. The European Union chose to sanction COVID relief funds when there has been corruption, for example, in agricultural subsidies in Hungary is widely reported. Why do you think the decision was made to target something that at least seems to be humanitarian relief and that would affect the common citizen, rather than something that has been widely reported on as corrupt and that would actually affect the politicians involved that are bringing their countries towards this authoritarian style of government?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm not entirely sure we've sanctioned COVID relief funding. This is, because I mean, first of all, we don't sanction funds. So I mean, there are a number of mechanisms like to see if these funds are spent correctly. But really, I'm not aware of anything that is linked to the COVID funding. At least not European funding. I don't know now, what you were thinking of. And in general, I mean, there have been some cases of fraud, of course, of funding, as you said. But really, I'm not here I'm not aware of COVID funding. And in this case, yeah, there is interruption of payment. And with Hungary, there is a different story now that the Commission is basically sent a letter to the government saying, look, guys, we might stop in the future funding if you don't comply with the number of rule of conditionalities that are there in the funding. That's where we stay, but this will be a discussion with this. But in general, also, I mean, speaking about fraud or irregularity, I mean, they are very little. And also, to explain how it works, the first control is always at the national level, and then the second control is at the European level. So there are a number of control on the use or misuse of the funding.
No, because I'm referring to an article in the New York Times from November 3rd, 2019, called "The Money Farmers: How Oligarchs and Populists Milk the EU for Millions." And it talks about how the European Union spends $65 million a year on subsidizing agriculture, but a chunk of that money emboldens strongmen, enriches politicians, and finances.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this the different story from the COVID funding. Yeah, there were a lot of, I mean, first of all, let's say that all the journalists report, and also the citizen monitoring of the fund, this is very welcome. That's of course that's super important. And in this case, number of beneficiaries, they got more of the funding. Okay, and then this is honestly, I don't know if then this was just a matter of irregularity, or is more a matter of political problem issue in this case.
Okay, because in our dealings with everyday citizens, part of the problem you were talking about before was how to decentralize it, and the information comes from the national government. And I think part of the problem that we've seen in that case is the national politicians take credit for European policies that are good, that are making Europe the leader in many important areas: antitrust, environmental regulations. And I'm wondering if there's a way we can stamp it, like, paid for by the EU, so the normal citizens know they're getting a tangible benefit from EU citizenship. Otherwise, they do think it's coming from their country, which can feed into this nationalist rhetoric that we're seeing in a lot of places.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. But when I said decentralized, I didn't mean that this should we should say to the government to communicate more about this, not only this, but more to communicate, let's say, the EU at the national levels. You see what I mean? So I mean, but that's a kind of different story, because what I see in everything, I mean, there are of course big topics that are interesting to everybody, but then there are a lot of topics that are very national. And so communicate from Brussels on very national topic linked to the European policy is super difficult. That's what I meant with decentralized.
Yeah, because we've also found in our video series and our interviews with everyday citizens who tend to be younger, because we wanted to get their outlook first, was that they appreciate, instead of like messages in words, they appreciate tangible benefits like the Erasmus Plus, the Discover EU program. Those seem to be like the most effective in making a positive impact on young people who are obviously very important future voters, and supporters of the EU as a peace project, because at the end of the day, the EU foundationally is a peace project, and it's the most successful one that we've had in Europe in its history. So I guess my question is that, oftentimes when we read European communications, it comes off a little bit as propaganda, because it can be self-congratulatory. Like when the EC president talks about, human rights, and then we think about, what's going on in the Mediterranean regarding migrants and Frontex and deeply disturbing stories about bad actors within these EU related foundations. The integrity of the message of the European Commission and the European European Union institutions in general gets diluted, and there's less believability. Is there something is that something that you think about, or something that you think that there's a way to help improve the messaging?
Yeah. I think, I mean, there are different aspects. The first one is that for a long time, I think the European communication rely very much on only political communication, meaning we thought, okay, we have journalists here in Brussels, and by the way, the number of journalists is decreasing year by year that are, you know, correspondent in Brussels, and so our communication is basically targeted them, and then they, you know, they multiply the communication and they multiply the information and this, and they inform the public. But then I think, luckily, in the last, you know, 6-7 years, we realized that we should do more like citizen communication, or try to reach out directly to the citizen. So this, you know, this come a lot of different successful, sometimes more successful, sometimes less, like integrated communication campaign, where you have a lot of things when you try to speak to for instance, the example that you made about Discovery EU. This is exactly like this. So Discovery EU was a company, but quite a good communication campaign, not to make try to talk directly to your target. In this case, with young people that were allowed to travel in Europe. So I think the first thing is probably reinforce this aspect, no, of the try to communicate more directly to the citizen, and you know, also doing this via the national thing. Yeah, and then of course I totally agree that we should get rid of anything that could be perceived as propaganda. I mean, this should you know, on the one side probably we should try to do a bit more emotional in the communication, but on the other side, you know, try to get rid of anything that can be perceived, yeah, but you know, top down or a patronizing or propaganda.
Right. Okay, well, I won't keep you any longer. I want to thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.